Hi, it's Nicole Magouirk with One Stamp 3 Ways for 2peasinAbucket.com. Today I'm going to share ideas on how to color this flower corsage stamp from Hero Arts. I first cut down my paper to 5.5 inches by 3 inches. And these are the stamps I'm going to use. This is the flower corsage. It's a cling stamp from Hero Arts. And I've cut 2 pieces of white smooth cardstock. This is Nina Solar White cardstock. It's good for Copic coloring, and you can also use other markers and things on it. Plus I've cut a piece of watercolor paper for my third card. I'm going to ink up my flower corsage stamp with Memento Tuxedo Black ink, and I'm going to stamp it off of the bottom right corner on each of these pieces of paper. Just going to make sure I got the whole surface of the stamp covered really good. I'm going to take my first piece of paper, move everything out of the way there, and I'm using a Fiskars stamp press. I like it. I use this a lot for clear and cling stamps. You can kind of hold it up above where you're going to stamp and make sure that's right where you want it, and it won't touch your paper before you actually press it on there. So you can see I've stamped it off the edge. So I didn't stamp the entire design on this. I wanted it to kind of look like the floral bouquet was coming off the edge. So I've done that on all 3 of those. The first sample I'm going to share is with the Design Memory Craft watercolors, and I'm going to speed through this really quick. I am just using a couple shades of red, and I'm kind of just scribbling. You can see that I'm not using a really precise or nice coloring technique whatsoever. And the great thing about these Memory Craft products is that, or these watercolors, is that they blend really nicely. So I'm just going to wet my paintbrush that does come with these watercolor pencils, and I'm just simply going to color in. Now I find it's best to color in each individual petal rather than just smearing the paintbrush across the entire design. It gives you more precise color, plus it makes each petal look like it was colored individually because it was. If you color the entire thing, it just doesn't look near as realistic or nice. So you can see I'm just going to finish kind of smoothing that all out, and all of those yucky scribble lines that I had are disappearing. It just makes this really beautiful watercolored effect. Now you can sit and let this dry, or you can heat it up to speed the drying a little bit quicker if you want to. You can see it's starting to dry here. I just let mine dry naturally. I'm just going to scribble in some green there. Did a couple different colors of green on each side of the petal. And I'm just doing my lighter color first. Then I'm going to go back with the darker color, and you can kind of smear that darker color over into the lighter for a more realistic and blended effect. Next I'm going to go in with some oranges. Again, I'm using a couple colors of orange and then a little bit of red right there in the center. I'm going to start with my lightest color and smooth that with my wet paintbrush, and then I'll go with the dark and kind of blend that dark into the light. Next I'm going to use some purples for this little flower down here. And one thing I did with all of the samples here is I used the same kinds of colors for all 3 mediums that I'm using, just so you can see the effects, how it changed, even though the card is exactly the same for all 3, how they look different with the different mediums and tools that you use. This last flower is going to be yellows, and again just kind of scribbling in with my lighter color, going back with a little bit darker, adding it here or there, and a little bit of orange there near the center of the flower. Wet my paintbrush, and again just kind of doing some of the darker yellows, going back into the lighter. And I find that you get better results if you do each individual little stamped piece rather than across the entire design. So that is the watercolored piece. Next, I'm going to share how I colored the same exact design with Copic markers. You want to start out with your lightest color, and I'm just going over the entire design and coloring in, kind of outlining it, and then coloring in little circles. This gives you a nice no line effect. You don't want any lines to show. These are alcohol-based markers, and so they dry really quickly. With reds especially, you want to be careful that you kind of let each color dry so it doesn't bleed outside of the lines. The correct ink and a stamp ink and paper helps with that a lot. I always use Memento Tuxedo Black ink for my Copic coloring, and then Nina Solar White cardstock for my color, or for coloring on. I've gone with my my medium shade, and you can see I added a little bit of that, and now I'm adding my darkest shade. And you just want to add that where you naturally think some shadows will fall, or where the petals of the flower will be darker. And that's just kind of by eye. I'm not real specific on that. I just want it to look more realistic and dimensional. Once you have that, you want to go back with your lightest color and blend those together. And again, I'm not going over the entire flower. I'm kind of going petal by petal. With the orange flower, I added my lightest first, then a little bit darker, and then a little darker yet. The leaves, I'm just going to add a couple colors of green, use my lightest first again, then my darker. Go back over with the lighter. You don't always have to even go back over it. If it blends nicely, especially in small areas, you don't really have to go back over it with your lightest color. For the yellow flower, added my lightest color first again, going back over it with a little bit darker shade of yellow, and then a little bit darker yet. And then smooth it all out with your lightest color again. And finally, for that last flower, I'm going to start with my lightest purple shade, color that all in, add a little bit darker color, and an even darker color, and then go back over it with my lightest color really well and blend those together. And you can go over it and as many times as you need to. It will never bleed through the paper or make a hole in your paper. For my last sample, I'm using the Design Memory Craft Big Brush Markers and Artist Pens. Again, I'm going to color these petal by petal, and I'm starting with my lightest color. These differ from the Copic markers as they don't blend per se like Copics do, but you can still get some really amazing results and dimensional flowers with these. Plus they do other things, like you can color on your stamp and then stamp that on your paper, which I'll show you here in a little bit with these big brush markers. They're really versatile. So I'm just going to color in this entire flower with my pink marker. And I am making this flower red, but I did start out with the pink just to give it some nice dimension and pinkish undertones. Next, I'm going to take a little bit darker marker and just add in the shading. And I'm using an artist pen rather, not the marker for this. They work together beautifully. Just coloring in a few extra areas. This is a little bit deeper pink, almost a reddish pink. And you can already see that this flower is really deepening and getting a little bit more dimension. Now I'm going to take a red big brush marker and add a little bit of shading to each individual petal. I really like how once you add another color, it really does make the flower start to look more reddish instead of pink. And then I'm going to go back in with my darkest color yet, the one that I used a second ago, and add just a tad bit more shading right over where I used that red marker. And there's my red flower. Again, I'm going to color this other flower yellow that I've been coloring yellow on all the other cards, and I'm going to use a light shade using one of the artist pins. They have a little bit smaller tip, a little brush tip for getting into those little small areas. I recommend that you color kind of the individual petals or areas on your stamped image rather than across the entire design, kind of like with the watercoloring. I think it gives you better effect. Go back in with my darker color, a little bit darker yet, a little orange, and you can add a little bit of shading and blending as you go, just to however you want it to look. I'm going to use my big brush marker, orange, to color my orange flower. Take a little bit darker orange yet and kind of feather that out a bit and put a little red there in the center. And that's all that one really needs. And take another one of my green big brush markers and color in the petals. This is the lighter color. And then I'll take a darker artist pin, a little bit darker shade of green, and add just a little bit of shading to those leaves for a more realistic look. For this last flower, I'm going to start with kind of a reddish purple marker, and I'll just color in the entire design, or this is one of the artist pins rather. Color that all in, and then I'm going to take a real purple and just kind of go over some of those stamped lines and to add my shading. And there's that piece all finished. So there you can see all three of them together to see how they look different. Okay, I'm going to use this Flowers and Leaves background by Hero Arts. It's a clean background stamp. And I am taking these big brush markers and simply coloring in the design on the back, or right on the stamp, surface of the stamp. I used pink for the flowers and then a little bit of red in the centers. And now I'm going in with the green big brush marker and coloring in the leaves. And I'm only doing it on either side because the pieces that I colored previously will kind of cover up that other area, so there's really no need to color that needlessly. I'm only coloring what I actually will need. I'm going to go in with even a little bit darker green and add a little bit of shading. The more colors you add, the more realistic and beautiful the background will be. Adding a little bit more color. Then I'm going to take a mister and mist up my stamp. It's going to give you a more watercolored look, and stamp that right on my card. Press that on there really good, and you can see the beautiful watercolor results. To finish the card, I tied a little bit of twine around the top of each stamped piece and stamped the greeting, of course. I stamped over the whole thing with a text background stamp and inked it with some antique linen and brushed corduroy distress ink and adhered it to the front of the card. For more information on these cards and the techniques shown here, please visit twopeasinabucket.com on April 15th, 2011. Thanks for watching.